Hello, I'm Lucy from Breakout and I'm here today to talk about all the creative writing books I read for NonFiction November. Welcome back, or welcome to our channel if it's the very first time that you're here. Lovely to have you. Please do subscribe for all sorts of bookish videos. We do a weekly video called The Week in Books where we talk about all sorts of the big bookish news that's out there, and also talk about what we're reading, and also loads and loads and loads and loads of reviews, which is what I am here for today, to talk about all the books that I read in Non-Fiction November. And I had a bit of a theme going on because everything I read was related to writing, to creative writing. So there were things that are actually, they were all really great books, but they're different. And I think that they will serve different people at different times in their writing career. To give you just a really tiny quick bit of background for anyone who doesn't know, I am actually an author, so I've had 2 novels traditionally published. They're on the shelf behind me, they're there, and I'm now working on my 3rd, but I kind of feel that you always, or I always need to be brushing up and sort of challenging myself to improve a little bit more all the time. I always want to get better. I want to write better and better things. So I do go back to creative writing books quite a lot, really. And in this wrap are some that I revisited that I've had for a while, and there are some that were completely new to me. So I'm going to start at the top. And the first one that I want to talk to you about is a really shiny book. Sorry, I'll move it so hopefully you'll be able to see it. The Creative Writing Course Book. And this is edited by Julia Bell. Now, this is the book that I think you need if you are staring down the barrel of a blank page. For me, this was absolutely the best book that I read when I was just starting out, but it still is one that I will revisit from time to time. It is a mixture of writing exercises and challenges, and also essays and advice pieces set by established authors and creative writing teachers. I think there's over 40 different people talking in this book on lots of different elements of creative writing, from the very first blank page, you're looking for an idea, through to characterization and setting and plot and all those things, and also some hints and tips on getting published at the end. And the reason that I think that this is the best book for a blank page is because it is the most encouraging and inspirational and kind of uplifting book at the same time as giving you advice. So it really is sort of got like a bit of a warm and cuddly feel, telling you that you can do it and it is all going to be okay. And I like the exercises that it gives you, and these essays actually, because it's light on the technical detail. It sort of breaks stuff down to you into manageable chunks and doesn't give you too much to bite off at any one time. Like, and I'll come to some of the other books later, like some of the other books perhaps do. So I do think it's a good one for starting out because it makes things manageable and puts it into chunks. The next 2 books I'm going to kind of pair up to talk about. One was an old favourite, one was a newbie. I read Plotting and Writing, Suspense Fiction by Patricia Highsmith, who I absolutely love, and I've had this book for years and I still love it. And also On Writing by Stephen King, which was a newbie one for me, but I love him as an author. So it was about time I picked it up, really. And these 2 books actually are pretty similar in lots of ways, because they kind of mix elements of memoir into their advice. So Stephen King does this more overtly. The first chunk of his book is sort of about his life in childhood and just starting to write as a teenager, and how his career and his success as an author got kick-started. The middle section is then sort of his I was going to say hardcore advice, but hardcore is not the right word. His tips, his advice and his tips, which I'll come back to. And the 3rd section then is again sort of more in a memoir style. And Highsmith as well Although she doesn't frame it as a memoir, and she doesn't, take you through different sections of her life, it kind of is a memoir of her writing, because you get, as she's giving you advice, these fabulous insights into the books that she has written, because she will give you examples of how she worked along the way. The style of advice is also pretty similar, and it won't be everyone's cup of tea, because it is not practical advice, really. It is not an instruction manual, if you are looking for that type of thing. And compared to the creative writing course book, the first one, it definitely is less instructive. But it does have absolute gold in there, which I really, really love. And I think actually the term that King uses to describe his own advice is something like woolly-headed BS. And that is pretty much what it is. He gives you, and Highsmith gives you, these sort of vague and at first glance very unhelpful statements, sort of things like, if you're doing it right, the characters will just take control and lead you along the way. And things like, when I'm trying to write things in an extra suspenseful way, I sit right on the edge of my chair so I can't relax too much. And things like that, which actually, you think, how does this help me? I'm not sure what to do with this information. But the more you read, the more you sort of find it's about an overarching attitude, I think. And what comes across in both these books is the sheer level of determination and perseverance and drive that these people have, the commitment to writing great fiction and improving, and all the sort of failures and bumps that they've had along the way, and then how they've picked themselves up to overcome them, that really make these books valuable. And their charisma also just shines through, which makes them thoroughly enjoyable reads, much more enjoyable, I think, than reading just an instruction manual. And I absolutely loved On Writing just as much as I have loved plotting and writing suspense fiction over the years. It's also probably worth saying, actually, that although it is about suspense fiction in the purest sense of the word, so I think Highsmith describes it as, the constant threat of something hideously violent or something along those lines, actually, the tips in there are relevant to all writers, because if your book hasn't got any suspense whatsoever, you're probably in trouble and no one's going to want to read it, are they? They also both make a central point, which I kind of subscribe to, and it is a less gentle point. These books, actually, they get increasingly brutal as I go through them. It's much less gentle than the creative writing course book, which is super, super encouraging. Both Highsmith and King kind of subscribe to the school of thought that not everyone is made for writing. There are going to be people who are absolutely, earth-shatteringly wonderful, and you're never going to be able to achieve that. They're just born with it. And there are going to be people who are utterly, utterly terrible, and they're never going to be able to really get much better. But there's this whole school of people in the middle, who are good writers and can push themselves and improve and drive forward. Or as Highsmith puts it, I was merely typing, very, very humbly, to make themselves the very best that they can be. And that is, I think, what I took away from this book most, although they do have, specific tips in there, little tidbits, little gems that stick with you. And actually one that I've had on a post-it note for years and years about Highsmith is how does this chapter advance the plot, or advance the story? How does this chapter advance the story? Butchering that, aren't I? It's been on a post-it for years. But the little tiny tidbits that you can take away in amongst all this sort of other broad brushstroke thinking about writing. So yeah, highly, highly recommend those books for anyone really at any stage in their writing career. The next books that I'm going to talk about are definitely ones for people who have already written something. That might be a small something, or in the case of the next book, it's probably a bigger something. But for this one, you're going to need to have words on the paper. is Steering the Craft by Ursula K. Le Guin, the fantasy author who was really, really super prolific. And this book gets straight in to the heavy, heavy detail, the nitty gritty, the as zoomed in as you possibly could be about things like words and sentence structures and language. It's got whole chapters called sentence length or adjectives and things like that. This is about nitty gritty of writing, and for me it was an incredibly helpful read. It looks tiny, doesn't it? But actually it's meaty in substance because it's got so many exercises in it and passages from other people's texts that she challenges you to find things in and pick apart and see how the mechanics of it work and what is it that makes it so powerful, or sometimes how the same passages can be twisted in different ways, in really subtle ways, to have completely different effects. And this isn't a book about writing being a spiritual journey or anything artistic, really, in that sense. It is about technical detail. And in that way, it takes a really different stance from the King book and the Highsmith book. So yeah, they're at the polar opposite ends in terms of what they're looking at, but actually also in the attitude they take. So one thing King, I think, says in his book is that, you know, you don't need to learn grammar rules. Either you are the kind of person that will just pick them up as you're reading things, and you'll just inherently understand them as you see them elsewhere, or you're not. And if you're not going to learn them, and you shouldn't be a writer. Whereas Le Guin is saying, if you want to be a really good writer, you can't possibly do it without understanding how language works on a really granular level. And I feel kind of hypocritical that I can sort of agree with both of their points. I do think that there is something inherent about a love of language and an ability to play with language and construct things from it. But I also think the more detail you know about how it works, the better you're going to be. And I will certainly, that was a book I hadn't read before, but it was one I will certainly be coming back to. I've done a selection of the exercises, but I'm just working on my third novel at the moment, and when I come to the end of the draft that I'm at, I'm going to go back to that book and work my way through all the exercises, or a lot more of them, with the text that I've written in mind, and get down to that level of detail and see what I've done, really, what I've done well and what I can do better. And I think that that is going to be a super, super useful book for me long term. The next book that I'm going to talk to you about, look what I've done to it, folks. It's Writing the Breakout Novel by Donald Masse. And I have to say, I absolutely cannot bear the title of this book. It's hideous. It implies that we are only writing to make money and for the fame and for the glory, and actually we should all just create carbon copies of books and copy what's already successful, and then we will be successful too. And I hate the title, but it's a really brilliant book, and that's actually not what it's about. It's just total bookshelf clickbait. It is about driving quality in your own work. It's about realizing your strengths and your weaknesses and what makes other people's novels successful, and then taking that information to raise the standard of your own work. And it is a really, really great book, but it is absolutely not a book, I wouldn't say, for somebody just starting out. If you are looking at that blank page, I think this book would be really intimidating. I would have been massively intimidated by this book when I was just starting out, because the level of detail in it is insane. It takes you through all the different aspects of books, basically, of novels. So plot and character and point of view, and all these different elements that go in to make a novel, but it takes you through them in such intense detail, and not in an encouraging way, in any way, shape or form, in a really brutal, cold and stark way, to tell you, I guess, Masse's observations as a high-flying New York agent for a squillion years, all the things that he has seen, to that go into the really successful books. And that doesn't mean creating carbon copies by any stretch. It just means focusing in on the specific elements of each type of book that really draw out its strengths. It's kind of a pretty black and white book, and that didn't bother me, but Masse certainly does not entertain that there might be alternative opinions to anything that he's saying. He doesn't have the humility or the charisma, for that matter, sorry Donald, of Highsmith and King, but what he does have is a nice authoritative tone and plenty of experience that made me totally buy in to what he was saying on the whole. Not completely exhaustively, but on the whole. It is really clearly structured. The information is broken down into really small sections, each clearly labelled, and then there's a checklist at the end of each chapter. Again, not telling you how to write it, but detailing characteristics that help books transcend above sort of every other book in their genre and things like that. It was written in, I think, 2000, and it is ever so slightly dated in certain places. So a little bit of the advice that he gives you at the end about how publishing works isn't really my experience at all. And I can only assume that's sort of a little bit because times have changed. Also, when he says things, perhaps in sort of throwaway comments like, oh, books about terrorists don't sell and things like that. We're now in a post 9/11 world where I think books about terrorists absolutely do sell. So I think sort of when he gives you the detail about specifics, that it's not really its strength, but overall the themes, picking out those details, giving you more of an instruction manual to work with, was something that I found really incredibly useful. So they were my 5 creative writing non-fiction books that I read this month, but I'm going to give you a bonus one because actually I think the question that I have had the most since I got published was, how did you get published? So it kind of seems that I can help you with that a little bit. Because I use this book, upside down. This was my Bible for getting published. And it is in fact called Getting Published. This edition's by Harry Bingham. I think he does all the editions. A new one comes out pretty much every year. It's by the Writers and Artists Yearbook. And it has everything in it to walk you through publishing, basically, from the very, very start of when you finished your manuscript, what you do with it next. And I didn't read it this month, but it kind of feels like an appropriate book to put on the end of all the rest, because it really was the manual that helped me get published, I guess, because I didn't know anyone in publishing or anything about how it worked. I was going completely cold turkey, and it really did sort of spoon feed me through the stages of getting an agent, what happens with publishers, and things like that all the way through. So there you go, bonus book on the end. And overall, it was a good reading month, a really interesting and valuable reading month for me in terms of non-fiction November. And I know a lot of people are doing NaNoWriMo at the moment as well, so it kind of feels appropriate. And if you are one of those people doing it, I would love to know how you're getting on, or if you've read any of these books, what you thought. If you have any other great creative writing reading suggestions for me, I'd be super interested. I'm always looking for new things to read, so please do talk to me in the comments below. In the meantime, check out bookx.com and the app's completely free, and I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.